One delicate item I would like to attract your attention to is this new mobility. So now my two controllers are up and up, they know each other, and that's fine because they need to talk to one another. The controller 30 also knows about home, and that's fine because you will need to talk to it. But all these controllers are running AirOS. So they are using what we call the traditional mobility, which is the standard mobility you may have known for years if you've been working with Cisco for years. But what if your controller needs to interact with iOS XE switches? What if that controller needs to be an MC for those switches? Well, there is something you need to do there because iOS XE switches use this concept of MA to MC, and therefore the MA and MC concept is separate in converged access. Well, it doesn't have to be, but it can be. Whereas in AirOS by default, MC and MA are both in the same appliance. So if you want to enable your controller, AirOS controller, to work with converged access switches, you need to bring this awareness to the controller that its MC to MA relationship may be split between two different boxes. So that makes that you cannot use the controller this way to work with converged access without checking a configuration item to enable this awareness. And that's done in mobility configuration where you can check this box, which is said, enable new mobility. Be careful, if you check that box, two things are going to happen. One, the controller is going to save its configuration and reboot, so you're going to have some downtime. That's the first thing. Second thing, it's going to be able now to talk with this new version of mobility that is going to use, by the way, CapWap encapsulation to talk from one controller to the other. But also it means that because the encapsulation is going to change, this controller will not be able anymore to talk to the other AirOS controllers that are still using the regular MC to MA mixed mobility. And the reason why is because in iOS XE, when you exchange mobility messages between controllers, these messages are going to be sent from one controller to the other, and they will be encapsulated into the CapWap protocol. It will still use a mobility messaging port, which is 16666, but the encapsulation, the header is going to be CapWap type. So be careful. It's not because it's CapWap that it's going to use 5246 and 5247 that you know for the AP to controller communication. So CapWap between AP and controller are still going to be using 5246 and 47. But between controllers, if you enable new mobility, the header is also going to be CapWap type, but the port is still going to be a mobility port, that is to say 16666. If you use the regular non-new mobility mode, then the encapsulation of messages between controllers is not going to be CapWap. It's going to be Ethernet over IP, which is protocol and IP protocol number 97. So the encapsulation changes between these two modes. And that's why these two modes are not compatible with each other. If you set your controller to new mobility, then all the other controllers you want to talk to have to be either converged access, where it's by default CapWap encapsulation, or if they are AirOS, you need to switch them as well to new mobility. So once you make that change, from regular mobility to new mobility, and if you have some other AirOS controllers you need to talk to, you pretty much have to change everybody to new mobility. The concept of mobility group stays the same, right? But if you go here on this menu, you see that now I have more options I didn't have before when this controller was not in new mobility yet. For comparison, if I go to the other controller, which is still in regular mobility, you see I have less option in this menu. So new mobility also brings new options, but they make sense once you understand what happens. If I go here, you see that now converged access, new mobility is enabled, and now I have this mobility controller public IP address which is set because that box is MC and MA by default. So the concept of MC is clearly visible along with the concept of converged access. And because I'm supporting the MC to MA communication, I can also go down and configure switch peer groups, SPGs. So I can define a new SPG name, give it a name, and then assign switches to that SPG. So in other words, this controller has become an MC, and because it's an MC, I can add to it some MAs and have all the options that you may see on converged access. So if I click the group name, I see its specifications. If I say switch peer group members, I can add new switches into that SPG. It's a pure MC. And of course, if I go back to mobility group, my connection to 30 is gone. Control data path is down because 30 is still running the old mobility or the regular mobility mode. So should you turn all your controllers into new mobility? Well, Not really. In fact, you would only do this if you are in a migration mode from regular mobility, you're adding converged access switches, and you need one of your ARS controllers to be your mobility controller. In that case, you would have to turn these ARS controllers into new mobility mode. But otherwise, unless you have this specific need, there is no reason to switch from one mode to the other. You can keep your controllers the way they are with this regular mobility and use this only as a sort of migration possibility while you're upgrading your network to iOS XE devices with, for example, 5760s, and you still want to use your ARS controllers during the migration phase. Otherwise, there is no reason to play with that mode. As a matter of fact, there are some roaming limitations between AROS controllers running regular mobility and iOS XE systems running new mobility. Just because some items are configured differently on each side and some items on one side do not necessarily make the same sense on the other side. So mixing and matching is probably not something you want to do for a long time. So this feature is only for migration purposes, and not all AROS codes support that new mobility mode anyway. So only use it if you need to. For the CCNA exam, just be aware it exists and about what it does. You don't need to be a pro at configuring it.